The ground beneath the Temple Mount is going to split open, and the treasures of King Solomon will be pulled from the dust to silence every scoffer on this planet. I saw this with my own eyes while I was dead for 6 minutes. Jesus took my hand and pointed to the Moriah Ridge, showing me the golden dome trembling as the earth beneath it collapsed into ancient voids. He told me, "Moshe, tell them the shaking is coming and it will reveal the truth buried for 2,000 years. You need to listen, because the Israel you see on the news today is about to vanish. What replaces it will shock every nation on earth, revealing a reality that I watched unfold clearly. To understand the weight of why Jesus chose me, you must know how I arrived at that moment of death. My name is Moshe Lieberman. I am 88 years old, a jeweler who spent 50 years in Jerusalem using a magnifying glass to find flaws in diamonds. My life began in the shadow of the Holocaust, surviving the camps as a child, which taught me to recognize the difference between a lie and the truth. I was always a Jew by blood, but I kept my heart far from the man on the cross until the day it stopped in my workshop. In those 6 minutes of silence, the precision I used for gold was turned toward the future of my people. What comes next is even more jarring than the earthquake. Jesus showed me 3 events: the temple shaking, a supernatural peace pact between Israel and Iran, and a discovery near the Dead Sea that will unite Jews and Christians. These revelations are the reason I was sent back. Before I describe the moment my heart failed and I saw his face, I must ask, do you believe we are living in the final generation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to see the signs Jesus showed me, please subscribe and activate your notifications now, because these revelations will change how you look at the world forever. The King is at the door. Before those stones beneath the Temple Mount start to shift, you have to understand the man telling you this. My life was defined by history and the precision of gold. For 50 years I sat in my shop near the Jaffa Gate, squinting through a loop to find flaws in diamonds. I survived the hunger of the Holocaust camps as a child, which made me a man who only trusted what he could physically touch. I lived as a Jew by blood, but a stranger to the spirit, watching Jerusalem's conflicts with a cold professional eye. I never suspected that my own heart was about to become the anvil upon which a new reality would be forged. It happened on a Tuesday, surrounded by the smell of silver dust and machine oil. I was working on a delicate filigree when a sudden white-hot blade of pain carved through my chest. It wasn't like the movies. There was no gasping, just a terrifying, heavy silence that turned my limbs into leaden weights. My fingers cramped, and I felt the brass loop slip from my eye, clattering onto the workbench like a final bell. I tried to reach for the phone, but the workshop floor tilted violently. Through a fading gray mist, I heard the door fly open and my grandson, David, screaming my name, his voice sounding like it was coming from a deep well. Then the strangest thing happened. The pain simply evaporated. I wasn't on the floor anymore. I was hovering near the ceiling, looking down at an old man slumped over a table covered in tools. I saw David's face, contorted and pale, as he desperately pumped at my chest, trying to force life back into a body that felt foreign to me now. I watched the paramedics burst in, their faces grim as they hooked me up to a monitor that showed a flat, unmoving line. Later, they would tell me my heart was silent for exactly 6 minutes. In that state, I felt a peculiar peace, watching them work on that body below as if it were just a broken watch. The walls of my workshop began to dissolve, replaced by a pull so magnetic it felt like I was being drawn toward the center of a star. The frantic shouting of the medics and the scent of ozone from the defibrillator faded into a rhythmic hum, like the sound of 1,000 rushing waterfalls echoing in a canyon. I was moving through a tunnel of light that didn't just illuminate, it vibrated with a frequency that seemed to wash away 88 years of bitterness and grief. I wasn't afraid of the darkness because the glow ahead was pulling me home. I was leaving Jerusalem behind. but what I found on the other side would rewrite everything I believed about the king. The pull intensified, and suddenly the humming of the waterfalls broke into a silence so profound it felt like a solid weight. I stepped out of that tunnel and found myself in a place that defied my jeweler's vocabulary. The light wasn't coming from a sun. It was a living glow with the warmth of a spring afternoon. For the first time in 88 years, the constant ache in my joints and the heavy pressure in my chest simply vanished. It was like stepping out of a rusted suit of armor and finally breathing real air. The colors were deeper than any jewel, vibrating with a peace that made the conflicts of Jerusalem feel like a distant, fading dream. Then he was just there. I didn't see him approach. He simply occupied the space in front of me. I expected a figure from a cathedral painting, pale and ethereal, but the man I saw was unmistakably a son of Judea. His skin was the color of seasoned olive wood, weathered by the sun, and his eyes were as dark as the Galilee at night. When our eyes met, I felt a physical shock that sent me to my knees. I couldn't speak, and I couldn't stop the tears washing away decades of skepticism. My soul recognized its architect with a certainty more absolute than any diamond I had ever appraised. He was no stranger. He was home. He reached down, and as his hand touched my shoulder, the vibration of his presence settled the storm inside me. "Moshe," he said, and hearing my name in his voice felt like every broken piece of my life being pulled back into alignment. He didn't look at me with judgment for the years I spent ignoring him. He looked at me with a beautiful, terrifying urgency. "I have brought you here because the stones are about to cry out," he whispered, "and I have things to show you that the world is not yet ready to believe." I knew then that my 6 minutes of death were for a revelation that would shake Israel's foundations. What he showed me next is haunting. As Jesus spoke those words, he shifted my vision back toward Jerusalem, but it wasn't the city I knew from my shop window. A violent tremor suddenly seized the Moriah Ridge, making the very air vibrate with a low, guttural roar that felt like the earth itself was screaming. I watched in frozen awe as the ground beneath the Golden Dome began to buckle and split, collapsing into ancient hollow voids that had been sealed for 2,000 years. From the rising dust, I saw figures in white robes descending into these newly opened chambers with lanterns. They began pulling out massive vessels of pure gold and the table of shewbread, pieces I recognized as divine work. I tried to speak, but the sheer weight of what I was seeing choked my breath. I had seen much beauty in my life, but these artifacts were perfect, radiating a light that didn't belong to this world. Jesus looked at the crumbling ridge and whispered, "The evidence of the first temple will be revealed to silence the scoffers, Moshe." He reminded me of the ancient words of the prophet Haggai, who said that God would shake all nations so that the desired of all nations would come and fill his house with glory. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a physical reclamation of a forgotten holy truth that would change everything. Before I could process the gold, the scene dissolved into a cold, sterile room lined with mahogany and maps. I saw men I recognized from the news, generals and leaders who had spent decades swearing to wipe Israel from the map. To my absolute shock, I watched an Israeli leader, a man I knew to be entirely secular, lean across a table to shake hands with a high-ranking official from Tehran. It wasn't a military surrender. It was a supernatural alignment that left the international observers in the room speechless. Jesus called it the impossible pact, a moment where the world's logic would fail and a deceptive calm would finally settle over the Middle East. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I asked Jesus if this meant the danger was finally over for my people, but his expression remained solemn. "Do not trust the peace of men, Moshe," he warned me, his voice cutting through the silence of the vision. "Watch this sign closely. for it marks the beginning of the final count when the world expects total war. I realized then that these political maneuvers were merely a surface-level shadow of a much deeper spiritual chess match. He wanted me to understand that when the impossible happens in the news, we must look up, not at the headlines. The weight of these revelations was already enough to crush me, but Jesus wasn't finished. These physical and political shakings were just the external preparation for something much more personal and profound. He took my hand again, and the sterile room of the peace treaty vanished, replaced by the salt-crusted air and white cliffs of the Dead Sea. I thought I knew everything about the history of my land, but what he showed me hidden in those caves made the golden artifacts of the temple seem small in comparison. It was the moment I truly understood the mission he was giving me. What I saw next in those jars made me fall to my knees. The salt-heavy air of the Dead Sea bit at my skin as Jesus led me toward the jagged white cliffs of Qumran, far from the polished gold of the temple vision. I saw a group of young hikers, their faces flushed from the desert heat, accidentally dislodging a cluster of boulders that had sealed a narrow crevice for 2 millennia. As the dust cleared, they crawled into a cool, shadowed chamber filled with clay jars that looked identical to the ones found in 1947. But these were marked with a symbol I had never seen before, a menorah intertwined with a fish. My jeweler's heart raced as I realized these weren't just more rules or war maps. These were the heartbeat of my ancestors, preserved in the dark until this very moment. I looked at Jesus, my hands trembling as I pointed toward the ancient leather scrolls being carefully unrolled by the hikers in the vision. "Are these more warnings of judgment, Lord?" I whispered, feeling the weight of our long, difficult history as a people who have always been looking for a sign. He shook his head slowly, his dark eyes reflecting a compassion that seemed to bridge the 2,000 years of silence between us. "No, Moshe, these are the voices of my first brothers in Jerusalem," he replied, his voice steady and warm. "They show that the first Jews who followed me never stopped being Jews. They kept the feasts and loved the law, but they saw the truth behind the veil. These scrolls will prove that the wall between my people was built by men, not by my Father." As the vision expanded, I saw these manuscripts being translated and broadcasted across every screen in Israel, causing a wave of shock that reached from the kibbutzim in the north to the skyscrapers of Tel Aviv. It wasn't just history, it was a spiritual explosion that shattered the great schism that has kept my people in a cage of misunderstanding for centuries. I saw the words of Ephesians echoing in the desert wind, reminding me that he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility. The physical find in the cave was simply the key to unlocking a door that had been rusted shut by tradition and fear, revealing a shared inheritance we never knew existed. Then, the most incredible thing happened, and it still makes my heart hammer against my ribs just thinking about it. Jesus showed me a mass awakening, a moment where the veil didn't just thin, it tore completely in half for the entire nation of Israel. I saw thousands of Jewish men and women, from the ultra-Orthodox in Mea Shearim to the secular youth on the beaches, suddenly stopping in their tracks as a collective realization washed over them like a tidal wave. I fell to my knees, sobbing into the dust of that vision, because I could feel the sheer relief of a people finally recognizing their king after 2,000 years of searching in the dark. It was a beauty so intense I begged him to let me stay there forever. I reached out to touch the hem of his robe, my face wet with tears as the magnitude of this final revelation settled into my soul. I wanted to know when, I wanted to know how I could help, but he just placed his hand on my head with a gentle but firm pressure. "The time for searching is over, Moshe, and the time for seeing has begun," he told me, his voice vibrating with an urgency that made the desert cliffs tremble. He looked directly into my eyes and said, "Tell them that I am not a God of the past, but the King of their tomorrow. Tell them the King is at the door, and the stones themselves are about to cry out my name." The brilliant light of the Dead Sea began to swirl and fade, the white cliffs dissolving into the familiar dim shadows of my small workshop in Jerusalem. The peace of his presence remained, but the weight of the mission he had just placed on my shoulders was heavier than any gold bar I had ever held. I felt the rhythmic hum of the waterfalls receding, replaced by the sharp metallic scent of machine oil and the distant frantic sirens of an ambulance. Jesus gave me one last look of absolute love before the vision closed entirely. "Go back, Moshe," he whispered as the world turned dark again. "You have 6 minutes of truth to give to a world that is running out of time." Jesus looked at me one last time, his gaze pinning me to that celestial ground with a weight of purpose I couldn't escape. "Go back, Moshe," he repeated, and I felt a surge of desperate resistance, wanting to cling to the hem of his robe rather than return to a world of shadows and fading sight. But he simply touched my chest and whispered, "They need to know the King is coming for them too." Suddenly the light shattered like a dropped mirror, and I was slammed back into my 88-year-old frame with a violence that made me scream. The warmth of his presence was replaced by the icy bite of the hospital room and the jagged, burning fire in my lungs. I heard David gasp beside my bed, his voice trembling as he cried out, "Grandfather, you're back!" I am telling you this now because my time is short and the things I saw are already beginning to stir beneath the surface of our daily lives. The earth is preparing to cough up the golden treasures of Solomon to silence every doubt, and the political tables are being set for a peace pact that will defy human logic. I didn't want to speak of these things at first, fearing the ridicule of a world that values only what it can measure. But the urgency in Jesus' eyes won't let me stay silent. Everything I was shown, the shaking of the Temple Mount, the miracle in Tehran, and the scrolls in the desert, is a physical countdown for a spiritual reality. The Israel you see on the evening news is just a thin veil for the glory that is about to be revealed. If you're watching this and feeling a sense of dread about the future of Israel or the chaos in the world, I want you to hear what Jesus told me specifically for you. He is not a God who hides in ancient history books. He is the King who is actively moving the pieces on the board to bring his children home. Don't let the headlines distract you from the holiness of the hour we are living in right now. If you have been wandering in the dark or feeling like the man on the cross is a stranger to your people, know that the wall is already down. He told me to tell you that the time for searching is over. Look for the signs in the stones and the scrolls, but more importantly, prepare your heart for the King who is standing at your very door. I was sent back to deliver this warning, and now the choice to listen belongs to you. If these revelations have touched your heart, please subscribe and activate your notifications so you don't miss what is unfolding next. Like this video to help this message reach others and comment below. Do you feel the shaking beginning in your own life? Share this with someone who needs hope today. The treasures are being uncovered, the pact is forming, and the Messiah is closer than you think.